same day, the same committee slapped down special protections for American veterans. So the Democrats on this committee voted, essentially the charge is, to protect pedophiles, but not veterans. Is that true? The author of the amendment, the man who tried to block the protection for pedophiles, joins us now. His name is Republican Congressman Steve King of Iowa. Congressman, good morning to you.
Good morning, Megan.
All right, so let's just make sure we understand what happened. They're passing a hate crimes bill to provide special protections to certain groups, including gays and lesbians and racial minorities and so on. You thought it would be a good idea to make sure, since they're adding sexual orientation to that bill, to make sure that pedophilia doesn't get swept up into special protection, that people who commit sex crimes against children don't get special protection as hate crime victims if somebody does something to them, and every Democrat voted it down?
They did, Megan.
There is an effort underway to normalize pedophilia. Yep, and it has two aspects to it. One is that sex with children doesn't hurt them. Kids like it, and so do adults. And there's nothing wrong with it. There is a movement on to normalize pedophilia, and I guarantee you your reaction to that's probably much the same as your reaction when you first heard about gay marriage. What has happened to gay marriage? It's become normal, and in fact, with certain people, in certain demographics, it's the most important issue in terms of who they vote for.
But regardless, when you set up pedophiles and protect them, I'd go to the floor debate. Also, L.C. Hastings, the second most senior member on the Rules Committee, read through a list of 30 different paraphilias, and he said, I think all philias whatsoever are protected under this law.
Oh, so he said he does think that they're protected.
Indeed, and they are. And the list of sexual orientation with the American Psychological Association is 547 different proclivities long. So, yes, I think this legislation does, and I think Tammy Baldwin's wrong, and actually I think she knows it.
Well, that's incredible. Then if you've got senior Democrats on the committee saying outwardly and leaving at least at a minimum a question mark about whether pedophiles, are protected under this act, we got a problem. Because then now are we not at the point where when somebody, no one wants to see violence against any criminal or anybody else, but if somebody attacks a pedophile, if some father who's the father of a child who was molested goes and beats up a pedophile, that father is now going to get arrested on a hate crime charge because of this ambiguity?
Megan, I think you're right. In fact, I would take you back to a fairly notorious case in California a little over 10 years ago, and it was the case of Ellie Nessler, who actually shot the perpetrator who had raped her son in the courtroom. She received a 10-year sentence for manslaughter and served 4 years of that. If the federal government decided that wasn't adequate, they could come in and bring their own federal hate crimes charges against her, and she could be serving life in a federal penitentiary today under this legislation.
But experts disagree about what causes pedophilia and even how much harm it does. Experts disagree about how much harm it causes. And then they go interview people to make the case for pedophilia. No, it's not a crime, it's love. Well, yeah, statutes on the book, but statutes are wrong. The statutes are from a bygone era where nobody, everybody's morality was wrong. I mean, look, I'm just telling you what it says. And they make the case that kids enjoy it, adults enjoy it. What's wrong with a little love? The same things that were said about gay marriage. Look at the story, the Elmo story, the puppeteer at PBS. 3 or 4 young people, kids, were hit on by that puppeteer. Look how little attention that story. In fact, that story was laughed off. Wasn't a big deal at all. I had checked the email during the break. I'm not engaging in shock values. I'm not trying to shock you. I'm just telling you what's out there on this pedophilia. I'll tell you where I first saw it. Wesley Smith, who is married to Deborah Saunders. She's a friend, a columnist, San Francisco Chronicle. He had a little blog post at the National Review website, "Is pedophilia just another sexual orientation?" So what? So I read it. And it was this piece that alerted me to the column, the piece about this in The Guardian. And that piece suggests that pedophilia may be just another sexual orientation. It's not perverted. It's not wrong. It's just another sexual orientation. And in fact, it's quite loving and as natural as any other sexual orientation. And this is what those of us with our heads and minds in the dark ages have got to modernize and realize. The argument being made in the piece is that the desire for sex with children is a natural part of the human condition. And in fact, if we acknowledge it and encourage it, we can actually somehow better protect children. That's in the story, too. It's the same thinking. If you remember back in the 90s when we were told that kids are going to have sex, you can't stop them. And that's why we needed to give away condoms in the schools. And remember, we had stories from Long Island, parents who said that they willingly let their daughter's boyfriends spend the night because it was better if their daughter was going to have sex in a clean bedroom rather than the backseat of a car. Well, same thing here. We can better protect children if we know that they're having sex with adults rather than it being done on the sly. And if it's supervised, and if it's engaged in by loving people, then what's wrong with it? This is in the article.
Well, Micah, the author of this electronic book has never claimed to be a pedophile, but his book is all about that topic. We've been on Amazon.com all day. You can see there are actually other books about pedophiles on this site, but thousands now have threatened to boycott Amazon.com because of this specific book.
When approached by media, author Philip Greaves attempts to explain his thoughts on pedophilia.
I don't think that it's always bad for the child.
Saying he never wrote his new book to offend anyone. The electronic book on sale on Amazon.com and is entitled The Pedophile's Guide to Love and Pleasure, a child lover's code of conduct. As you might expect, it's gotten a lot of attention, some turning to the internet to express their discontent, others wondering how this type of material is allowed to be sold. Greaves, who lives in this home in Colorado, defends his actions, saying he wrote the book, which sells for less than $5, because he wanted to establish guidelines and wanted to appeal to the better nature of pedosexuals.
Every time you see them on television, they're either murderers, rapists, or kidnappers. And, you know, that's just not an accurate presentation of the that particular sexuality.
Academics are quoted in the Guardian piece saying that sex with adults does not hurt children. Normalization. So Wesley decided, he wrote a whole piece on this, normalizing pedophilia. where he quotes extensively and looks into it and finds out what this is all about. Pedophilia, bringing dark desires into the light. And it says, among other things, this article's loaded. This is pedophiles may just be wired differently. There's nothing wrong with them. They're just wired differently.
Now to a story about one of the most sensitive subjects imaginable, the abuse of children. There are some people who think attitudes and actions towards pedophiles should be adjusted. Correspondent Shannon Bream explains.
A small group of psychiatrists and other mental health professionals is advocating changes to the way the American Psychiatric Association defines pedophilia in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM, saying those they call minor attracted persons are being unfairly stigmatized.
Instead, a psychiatric term gets turned into something that's just a demonizing pejorative. That troubles me.
Dr. Fred Berlin, associate professor at Johns Hopkins University Medical School, was the keynote speaker at a conference held by the group in Baltimore, Maryland last week. He says those pushing to redefine pedophilia are simply worried that the current perception keeps adults who are attracted to children from getting help.
If there are people out there who are attracted through no fault of their own towards children, we want to try to assist them to make sure they don't act in ways that are going to cause problems for other people.
But Berlin admits there were some at the conference who suggested sexual relations between adults and children are acceptable, something he says he does not condone. Dr. Judith Reisman, author of Sexual Sabotage, attended the event.
The whole conference was slanted very clearly to the notion that pedophilia was a normal variation of human sexual conduct.
In 1990 and 1992, the Baltimore Sun reported that Berlin refused to comply with a state law requiring him to report patients he believed were engaged in child sex abuse, instead directing them to first see a lawyer who could then direct them to Berlin, thus protecting any conversation under the attorney-client privilege. The Maryland Attorney General deemed that illegal. Today, Berlin labeled the accusation that he would refuse to report a pedophile actively engaged in child abuse, quote, absolutely false. Skeptics say the group Berlin spoke to has one goal: to move society a step closer to accepting sexual contact between adults and children, even decriminalize it.
Absolutely. Oh, they're very clear about that. Their goal is to take all shame out of the lust for children.
Robert and Barbara Curley are fighting to answer that question. The Massachusetts couple is suing the North American Man-Boy Love Association, an organization that openly defends what it calls intergenerational sex. Critics call them pedophiles. The Curleys say that NAMBLA shares responsibility for their son's murder. Their lawsuit seeks millions of dollars in damages, the hope being that a massive verdict would effectively drive NAMBLA out of business. The Curleys and their supporters say that this tactic is a legitimate way of holding groups morally and financially accountable. Opponents call it an end run around the Constitution. Here's Kathy Slobogan.
Jeffrey Curley was just 10 years old when he was killed. Not by strangers, but by men he thought were his friends. Two men who wanted sex from him for the promise of a new bike.
He thought they were his friends, and they were targeting him for sex. That was the reason for the whole seduction. That was the reason for the lure of the bicycle. And I think the evidence points to the fact that when Jeffrey Curley found out what these men were after, he said no, and he struggled, and that's why they killed him.
And who is defending NAMBLA? The ACLU.
Do you feel like you missed out on a normal childhood?
What childhood? I don't know what that means.
A lost childhood and a loss of innocence. He blames the adults, not just those looking to profit from charming children, but also some with far more sinister motives.
I can tell you that the #1 problem in Hollywood was and is and always will be pedophilia. That's the biggest problem for children in this industry.
The casting couch even applies to children.
Oh, yeah. Not in the same way. It's all done under the radar.
Nobody talks about pedophilia.
It's the big secret.
And it's widespread?
Oh, yeah. I was surrounded by them when I was 14 years old. Surrounded. Literally. Didn't even know it. It wasn't until I was old enough to realize what they were and what they wanted and what they were about and the types of people that were surrounding me till I went, oh my God, they were everywhere like vultures.
Vultures who Feldman says abused him and his best friend, the late child actor Corey Haim, his co-star in The Lost Boys.
Well, what happens if my mom is dating the head vampire?
Feldman says the trauma of that pedophilia contributed to Haim's death.
There's one person to blame in the death of Corey Haim, and that person happens to be a Hollywood mogul. And that person needs to be exposed, but unfortunately I can't be the one to do it. But the person that knows who did it and knows who he is watching right now, I guarantee you. Yeah.
Intriguing.
Yeah. There was a circle of older men that surrounded themselves around this group of kids. And they all had either their own power or connections to great power in the entertainment industry.
Feldman won't name names. And he admits his friend had a struggle with addiction, which he says was a mechanism to cope with his demons.
It was a symptom.
It was a symptom, correct.
Are we in it?
In 2008, the two Coreys confronted each other on their reality show about the dark past they shared.
You let me get around in my life, man, raped, so to speak, when I was about 14 and a half, and I'm saying this right now. What'd you do, man, when you saw that going down when I was 14 to me? What'd you do? You knew about it.
You want to talk about the truth? Okay, well, then let's talk about the truth. I was being molested at the same time by somebody else. What'd you do? You know, there's a lot of good people in this industry, but there's also a lot of really, really sick, corrupt people in this industry. And there are people in this industry who have gotten away with it for so long that they feel they're above the law. And that's got to change. That's got to stop.
Oh, Leanne. I was almost going to call you Lori. How could I miss? Oh, it's very easy. You're both very pretty. You have green eyes.
Blue.
Are they? They're not blue. Now, don't tell me that. Look at me a little closer. They're green. So I fooled you. I fooled you. Do you talk about getting married and having a family and things like that?
No.
You don't? What do you do when you're 11 years old for a date? Where do you go? What are some things you do?
We just walk home from school with each other.
Oh, you walk home from school with each other. Okay, what category? Do you hand out kisses, Jennifer? You look like a young lady who likes to give lots of hugs and kisses out, do you? Eh? Eh?
Not really.
Not really. Not really. Can I have a hug and a kiss? I can't have one?
Mm-mm.
Even if I say and whisper in your ear that, Allison, you're gonna win the show, I still can't have a hug and a kiss? Well, I guess you can't win the show then. If I don't get a hug and a kiss. Yeah, you hear that? Yeah, you hear that? That's a good answer. Oh, you missed.
Stephanie, which category for you?
No kisses. Are you shy?
Okay.
Can I have a little kiss, please? Oh, let's me off the top of the show. See, she'd get a whole bunch of right answers. And you give out kisses, though, don't you, Stephanie?
No.
Oh, you don't, too? How come? Yeah. Okay, we've got Stephanie and Lorraine here in the big family kiss. I couldn't get that kiss earlier. Oh. Oh. The mothers are always so easy to kiss. It's the kids. Okay, dear. Oh.
The LA Times dug into hundreds of documents that detail allegations against Boy Scout personnel and volunteers. The files appear to show a pattern of protecting the accused and sweeping it under the rug. You went through 1,600 confidential files dating back from 1970 to 1991. How many cases of abuse are we talking about here?
Thousands, really. We looked at 1,600 cases, but many of those cases involved several victims. So as many as 2,000, even 3,000 victims are likely named in these files.
And what are the accusations?
Well, a lot of them are rather explicit and detailed. Many of the files contain handwritten accounts by the young 10-year-old boys who were sexually abused. The Boy Scouts were attempting to put together a complete file so that they could expel these men from scouting. So in the process, they gathered rather explicit accounts of the abuse that had happened.
And you found, by what I was reading here, 500 cases in which the information came from the boys, parents, staff members, or perhaps even anonymous tips. You say police were not told in 400 of them. How did you verify that information?
Well, in 80% of the cases, we found no indication that the authorities had been contacted. In more than 100 cases, we found explicit references to the fact, to efforts to hide the abuse, sometimes even from the parents of the victims. What we did was we took several of these cases, many of these cases, and ran them through public record searches and interviewed people who had been involved in the case. What's clear is that in many of these cases, the Boy Scouts, instead of informing authorities, decided to keep this information to themselves.
And were there any convictions here in what you found?
One of the things we saw repeatedly was men whose sexual abuse was covered up by the Boy Scouts of America went on later to be accused of different crimes involving sexual abuse of boys. And so, yes, there are sometimes convictions that happen subsequent to these cover-ups.
And Jason, the Scouts did send us a statement, so I want to put this up for everybody. It says in part here, in the more than 100 years that the BSA has served youth, society has learned about this important issue. The BSA continuously enhanced its multi-tiered policies and procedures, which now include background checks, comprehensive training programs, and safety policies.
There's no doubt that the Boy Scouts of America has implemented a number of policies over the years that are intended to protect kids from sexual abuse. The question that we are not able to answer, then I don't think anybody is able to answer, is are those policies working?
Lori, you know, in terms of stories, it, for many people, does not get any more disturbing than this. And when we speak of half of the child pornography industry, half of all that occurring and being made in the United States, a lot of people would be shocked at that alone. Never mind federal employees engaged in this or government employees engaged in this kind of thing.
Yeah, Jackie, hi. Thanks for having me on. I know it's a pretty steep learning curve for myself as well. Not only federal employees, but the military with top security clearance, apparently using their .mil email addresses, about 5,000 military at the Pentagon, and the Pentagon decided not to even investigate 1,700 cases because they decided it wasn't a priority. So Senator Grassley has got that reopened, making it a priority. But yeah, it's pretty staggering. It's the fastest growing crime in America. It's growing by about 150% every single year. So we don't have really, really good data on how much child porn and child trafficking is being done, but we do know that America is probably the #1 place in the world right now when you combine all the figures.
But you're saying it's a national crisis of federal employees engaged in the child porn industry. A national crisis. What do we know about how pervasive this is?
Well, those are some of the figures that we're trying to get. We're applying for some research grants to try to actually get some real numbers. But if you type into a Google search engine, almost any federal government agency, Department of Transportation, Homeland Security, State Department, Department of Justice, and then type in arrested for child porn afterwards, you're going to find case after case after case. If you type in police officer arrested for child porn, lawyer arrested for child porn, you're going to find case after case across the whole country.
Okay, but you know, on the surface, this does not make sense to a lot of people. I mean, you're talking about high-ranking, successful members within society, never mind the fact that these are people with government jobs. I mean, we presume that, you know, if there's a place you can't get away with it, it would be with a government job because there are layers of oversight.
Well, Jackie, you would assume, for instance, that if you were an assistant attorney general in the Department of Justice under Eric Holder, who claims he cares about trafficking of children, and you did child porn on your Department of Justice work computer, you assume you'd be held accountable. And Eric Holder refused to prosecute his own assistant attorney general who was caught doing child porn on his work computer at the Department of Justice. So when the impunity starts at that level, it just cascades all the way down.
So are you saying police, judge, I mean, how pervasive is this? I mean, what I'm hearing from you is that at every level, no one can get to the bottom of how big this is because everyone at every level is involved in it. How has this been working? You've got to explain more about that.
Okay. Well, look at the case in Vermont, right?
Yeah.
So there was a Homeland Security trainer at the police academy in Vermont who apparently was caught with a number of other people at the police academy doing child porn on police computers. That's out in the public. It was a known fact.
And when you say doing child porn, do you mean using the computer for what purpose? Just trading images or producing it at home and then uploading it? What are we talking about in real terms?
Well, yeah, no, great question, Jackie. We don't really know because so much of this is being covered up and hidden, but apparently the progression is sort of like an addiction to alcohol or drugs. So, you know, you have to constantly drinking more and more alcohol to get the buzz or the feeling. So apparently it's the same. People start with porn, and that doesn't do it. Then they go to hard porn, that doesn't get them off. Then they go into child porn. And sooner or later, just like drugs, people realize how much money they can make.
Yeah.
So if you're already willing to do child porn, and then you realize you can make $1,000 on average a day, and this is a Department of Justice statistics, just by molesting a child in front of a live webcam. I mean, it's just incredible what people are doing.
Is the difference, are these American children? Do we know, Lori, who's being victimized, or kids overseas and images being traded from overseas? Do we know?
I mean, it goes all over because it's global, but of course this is American children. If half of all child porn is being produced in America, these are American children. The crime requires a fresh supply of children all the time, and the under threes are the ones that they really want. Apparently an under 3-year-old is considered platinum on the market. But so in Vermont, Jackie, what happened was the cops then covered up the investigation, refused to release the police investigation. The Homeland Security trainer apparently committed suicide, but we don't really know because the records haven't been released. The Attorney General of Vermont decided that he wasn't going to prosecute anybody in the case because he said suddenly there was no more evidence. And then the Rutland Herald in Vermont, a little newspaper in Vermont, sued to get the police records. Okay. And the Vermont Supreme Court said, no, these police records will never be released, and the way that the decision reads, as I understand it, is that if the police are caught doing child porn, those records will be forever sealed. That is not in the best interest of Vermont's children. That is in the best interest of a pedophile ring.
Here comes 53-year-old James Wiles, a retired truck driver from Jacksonville.
You can come on in. Hi.
Online, Wiles uses the screen name Hambubger to chat with a decoy named Claire, who told him she was 13. Early on, Wiles tells the girl he's in love, and he quickly hopes the love affair will go to the next level.
Maybe if you want, we could have sex, or just go to the beach and enjoy each other's company.
He goes on to say he wants to perform oral sex on her, and she replies it's okay.
As long as you're gentle.
Baby, I will be gentle as a pussycat.
He says he wants Claire to meet him in her underwear, pink to be exact. Claire agrees and has her own request.
Is there any way I can get you to bring me some M&Ms? Hi. How are you?
And here he is inside the undercover house. Wiles keeps his online promise.
Did you bring my M&Ms? Did you bring the condoms too? No. Yeah. Thank you. Well, I'm going to go change. I'll be right back, okay?
We've blurred his graphic body language, which seems to telegraph exactly what's on his mind.